Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Full Moon Film Buff. Today we're going to be talking about the short film, The Werewolf, filmed in 1913. This is commonly considered to be the first werewolf movie ever filmed. Unfortunately, I couldn't watch it because the last known copy of the film was destroyed in a warehouse fire at Universal in 1924. Let's talk about prominent cast and crew. This film was directed by Henry McCrae, who directed 164 films from 1912 to 1933. It was written by Ruth Ann Baldwin, who wrote 34 films from 1913 to 1921. The Werewolf is her first film credit. She also directed a dozen films in 1917. This is interesting. Women have always been working in Hollywood, even clear back in the silent film days. Maybe not as many as men, but women have always been a part of Hollywood. The cast and credits order include Clarence Burton as Ezra Vance, prospector and trailblazer, Mary Walkamp as Kiani as a young woman, Phyllis Gordon plays Watuma, daughter of Kiani, Lulu Warrington plays Kiani in her later years, Sherman Bainbridge plays Stone Eye, William Clifford plays Jack Ford. I really wish I could recommend this movie to you. Unfortunately, I can't. It's been destroyed. However, the short story upon which it's based is available and is free and in the public domain. A link to the short story will be in the show description. And now for a summary of the short story. A collection of French-Canadian soldiers are celebrating Christmas in 1706. One sentry thinks he sees Iroquois Indians dancing around a fire on a frozen river island. He fires a warning shot. When scouts find no evidence of Indian presence, the sentry is punished on suspicion of drinking while on duty. His fellow soldiers are not so sure and worry that he saw a pack of loup-garou, a French word for werewolf. One trapper with the group relays a story about the time he encountered a similar band of werewolves. He described them as red-skinned men with the heads and tails of wolves, but the limbs and torsos of men. He saw a human corpse being butchered. Lamenting the fact that he had no holy water to anoint his musket balls, or a four-leaf clover to use as wadding, he sufficed to use his knife to mark his lead ball with a cross and added 2 beads from his rosary to his musket load before firing a shot and then hightailing it back to his camp. One of his companions had gone missing and was never heard from again. Then, the sergeant of the crew told a tale about a former comrade named Baptiste, who had married an Indian maiden after the fashion of her tribe. He called her Singing Bird, that's a rough translation. She followed Baptiste as his unit was moved about during the war. She was very possessive and jealous, threatening her man with dire retribution if he ever cheated on her. She followed him, even when his commanding officers gave the strongest orders against camp followers, even though that meant he might get in trouble with his superiors. Eventually, however, they became separated when his unit's orders were changed before they reached their original destination. She could not follow if she did not know where he was going. Years passed and the war ends. Baptiste assumed Singing Bird had returned to her tribe. The general offers a generous severance package of land and gold to any soldier who wants to retire, marry, and settle down. Baptiste had met a nice Catholic French-Canadian girl and was ready to get married and take that deal. But then he runs into Singing Bird. She turns her nose up at him. 10 days before Baptiste's wedding, his fiancée falls mysteriously ill. He tried everything to help, but nothing worked. Baptiste was certain Singing Bird was responsible. She came to him and told him she would give him Indian medicine that would save the poor girl if he met the squaw at midnight under the full moon at a certain spot on the road. In desperation, he agreed. Baptiste knows it is a trap, but goes anyway. He is ambushed by a giant wolf. His knife could not pierce the wolf's hide. He realized he was fighting the loup-garou. He tried to kill it by cutting the sign of the cross into its forehead. In the end, he could only cut its paw off as it ran off. Baptiste's fiancée died the next day of smallpox. Singing Bird was never seen again. The next day, a farmer found the severed arm of an Indian woman in his field. Because I couldn't watch the movie, I'm forced to rely on historical movie summaries. According to the Universal Weekly, Volume 3, number 27, from December 1913, the play opens in pioneer days. Kiani, an Indian maiden, is married to Ezra Vance, a trailblazer. When her child is 5 years old, Kiani is driven back to her tribe by Ezra's brother, who scorns all squaws. Ezra is killed by an old enemy, and Kiani, thinking his failure to return to her to be indifference, brings up their child, Watuma, to hate all white men. When the child is grown, Clifford and a party of prospectors appear. Kiani, now a hag, sees her way to be revenged. She sends her daughter to Clifford's camp, and he is driven nigh mad by her beauty. Clifford finds her in the arms of a young Indian. She taunts him. Enraged beyond control, Clifford shoots the buck. He flees to the mission. Watuma leads the enraged Indians against the friars. When one of them raises the cross, Watuma slowly dissolves into a slinking wolf. 100 years later, Clifford, now reincarnated in the form of Jack Ford, a miner, receives a visit from his sweetheart Margaret. Hunting with her, he comes upon a wolf which he is unable to shoot. The wolf dissolves into the woman of old, and there appears before his puzzled eyes the scene where he slew the brave. The wolf woman would caress him, but he throws her off. She returns again as the wolf and kills his sweetheart. Clifford's punishment for the deed of past lives is made complete at the death of the one that he loved. Unfortunately, since the movie is destroyed, we can't talk about the transformation scene. The short story is vague on how and why the werewolves transform. We never see that or hear about it. But there is lots of interesting imagery in the story. Lots of Christian iconography. Silver does not show up, nor does the full moon. However, carving crosses into lead musket balls or werewolf's forehead, those are all apparent and important. One of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this movie is to bring up the very real problem of film preservation, specifically related to history. The National Film Preservation Board estimates that 90% of silent films made before 1920 and 50% of all films made before 1950 have been destroyed and are unavailable. That's a precious loss of history and the development of film as an art form that we'll never get back. One of the biggest reasons for this is technology. The earliest materials used to make film stock was called nitrocellulose, and it was extremely flammable. Flammable to the point where it could and did sometimes just catch fire sitting by itself. It was illegal for years to carry film stock on undergrounds around the world because of the risk that they might just catch fire and kill people on the subway. Storing large amounts of film in warehouses was just a recipe for disaster, but they didn't really have a better option, and they didn't really think that they needed to be protecting this. It was, after all, a mass market entertainment medium, and it wasn't serious art. Now that we wish we had it, there's no time machines to go back in time and fix it. Over time, the technology has improved, and film stock was eventually made out of other materials such as acetate, which lasts longer and is not nearly as flammable. However, even those materials have problems like film degrading and colors fading. Loss of movies continues to be a problem, and film historians and film preservationists continue to work to try and find ways to save those precious films so that we can study them later. The flammability of early film stock is actually the reason why you've probably heard the phrase shouting fire in a crowded theater. The Supreme Court used that phrase when talking about a free speech case as an opportunity or a spot where it was permissible to limit free speech. And the reason they did that is because it was a real problem when that case came up. There are numerous instances where dozens, maybe even hundreds of people died in theaters in fires to the point where the general public could very easily be spooked. There are a couple of well-known instances where people died because someone falsely shouted fire in a crowded theater. Most notably, over 24 people died in 1911 in the Canonsburg Opera House because someone shouted fire. And in an Italian hall, over 70 people died in a trampling accident because the crowd was desperate to get out of what they perceived to be a dangerous situation. It's not that big a deal anymore, but it was, and that's why the Supreme Court used that particular turn of phrase. Now let's talk about the motive for the werewolf attacks in both the short story and the short film. In both cases, the werewolf attacks out of jealousy or to obtain revenge for perceived slights. In both cases, a woman, perceiving her mate to have been unfaithful to her, acts in ways to get revenge. I think that's particularly effective in both the short story and the short film, but it would be a difficult motive to draw out to a full-length feature film. It's simple, short, punchy, and to the point, but it also only applies to a particular individual. Although in the case of the short film, it does seem that from the synopsis, the woman at least, extrapolated her revenge or her jealousy against one white man to all white men, and use that as justification for going after them years later. This does bring us to a problem with both the short story and the short film. They were both made over 100 years ago, and both of them paint the Native American as the exoticized other. They're different and scary. They have access to strange magical powers that us white people don't have access to. Both of these stories were made without really input, as far as I'm aware, from Native Americans. And this is an area where I'm really going to want some help. As I've said in a previous video, there are lots of legends from around the world about werewolves. It's not just a Native American thing. But Native Americans are often brought up as the source of some of these Native American werewolf legends, and sometimes in some pretty insensitive and untrue ways. I'd like to be able to talk to someone who knows more about that particular area of werewolf lore, is an expert on Native Americans and their legends and history with the lycanthrope and with the skinwalker and the various things that I've heard them called. I'd like to know more. That's part of the point of this whole thing, is for me to become the expert, and I'm not yet. I watch all these movies, and we'll certainly talk about it as it comes up. It's going to come up again. I know it will. In this case, both of the Indians in question have been wronged, at least they perceive that they've been wronged, and are seeking to get what they view as justice, even if that justice seems a little harsh and excessive to our modern eyes. So it's not making them out to be horrible, evil, then just giving them an extra avenue for obtaining revenge and obtaining justice. The last thing I want to talk about is adaptation in Hollywood. This is the very first werewolf story we ever have on film, and it's an adaptation of a short story. There is no golden age, there is no period in cinema history where movie makers were not adapting other materials and turning them into movies. The very first Oscars in 1925 had a Best Adapted Screenplay category. That's how common it was clear back then. And there are some really good reasons for this if you stop and think about it. Movies, unlike a lot of other art forms, require teams of individuals to make and require a lot more money. It costs a lot more to make even a short film than it does to write a poem or to paint a painting. Spending that much money on an untested, unproven, and new idea is risky. Spending that money and that time and that effort on an idea that's already worked in a different medium, well, that's got a better track record, and that's why it's happened ever since the beginning. Now, I don't really consider this to be a problem. I know that some people do, and that's fine. Everyone's welcome to their own opinion. My opinion is that adapting a work does change it. Taking a short story, a novel, a video game, a comic book, or a piece of art and turning it into a movie is changing it into a different thing. People can and do argue about what got included, what got changed, what got ignored. All of those decisions are part of what makes the original work, right, the new movie, even if it was based on something before, into its own unique and important piece of art. In a broader sense, all art is adaptation. All art is artists taking the world around them that they see, whether it's the landscape, the colors, their life experiences, the sounds, anything, and turning it into an art. That includes the other art that they consume and read. All art is an appropriation of the world around you through your lens, expressed back to the world. That's what makes art important. That's what makes art valuable. And that's also what makes adaptation, I think, a perfectly valid and important and great way to get stories to broader audiences. Is it sometimes done poorly? Sure. Is it sometimes done insensitively? Of course. I'm not going to argue that every adaptation is great just because it's an adaptation. But I am going to argue that just saying, oh, well, that was adapted, or that's a retelling, or that's a reboot, automatically makes something bad. I think that's just as lazy intellectual thinking. Evaluate the movie on its own. Evaluate it in relation to the thing that it's adapting or rebooting or changing. Those are discussions well worth having, but just dismissing it because it's an adaptation, I think that's weak. Additionally, we're talking about werewolves. We're talking about movies about werewolves. Legends of werewolves have existed for thousands of years. The very existence of werewolf cinema is an adaptation of legends and stories that have been told for hundreds and thousands of years. We couldn't even discuss werewolf cinema if we didn't discuss adaptation. It's going to come up over and over again, so you better get used to it now. Well, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Full Moon Film Buff. Next week, we're going to talk about a movie that you can actually see, Wolfblood from 1925. I hope to see you back here. Keep an eye on the phase of the moon and a silver bolt in the chamber. Thanks.